A warm welcome to Diplomatic Channel. I'm Amarachi Ubani. This week, are Russia's neighbors drumming up war rhetoric or propaganda? Or does Russia intend to invade Ukraine? That's the question. With 100,000 troops stationed at its border with Ukraine, NATO and other Western powers seem to think so, as does the US. We'll be looking into the negotiations held this week and where they could lead as Russia warns against Ukrainian NATO membership, expansion, and military equipment coming into Ukraine. My guest is an author, lawyer, publisher, and commentator on world affairs, known simply as Dele Ogun. He'll be joining me from London. Then, has there been a coup in Burkina Faso? We'll find out later in the program. That's Diplomatic Channel in a wrap. Let's take a quick look at diplomatic headlines. We'll be right back.
Japan's ambassador to Nigeria, Matsunaga Kazuyoshi, has commended Nigerians living in his home country for doing well and being good ambassadors of Nigeria. Ambassador Kazuyoshi made the remark when he paid a visit to the chairman, Nigerians and Diaspora Commission, Mrs. Abike Dabiri-Erewa, in Abuja. Ambassador Kazuyoshi says he wanted to make the visit to the NITCOM boss to promote grassroots exchange system between the people of both countries and to learn NITCOM's structure with the hope of replicating same for Japan's 1.4 million people in the diaspora.
If there's ever any complaint like this, particularly one as serious as this.
British Deputy Prime Minister Dominic Raab says lawmaker Nusrat Ghani's claim that she was sacked from a ministerial job partly because of her Muslim faith should be properly investigated if she makes a formal complaint. Ghani, who lost her job as a junior transport minister in February 2020, told the Sunday Times that she was told by a weapon enforcer of parliamentary discipline that her Muslimness had been raised as an issue in her sacking.
It's a very serious allegation, a very serious claim, and we take it very seriously. There can be no discrimination, Islamophobia or any other kind of discrimination in the Conservative Party. The Chief Whip has overnight made it clear that the allegation is in relation to him, this is Mark Spencer, and he categorically has denied it in what can only be described as the most strenuous term.
Pfizer Incorporated Chief Executive Albert Bourla said on Saturday that an annual COVID-19 vaccine will be preferable to more frequent booster shots in fighting the coronavirus pandemic. Pfizer and BioNTech's COVID-19 vaccine has shown to be effective against severe diseases and death caused by the heavily mutated Omicron variant, but less effective in preventing transmission. With cases increasing, some countries have expanded COVID-19 vaccine booster programs or shortened the gap between shots as governments scramble to shore up protection.
Welcome back. The UK is accusing Russian President Vladimir Putin of plotting to install a pro-Moscow figure to lead Ukraine's government, saying the Foreign Office took the unusual step of naming former Ukrainian MP Yevgen Murayev as a potential Kremlin candidate. The 46-year-old is part of a group of politicians in opposition to the pro-Western leadership that took power after the 2014 Maidan Street protests. He was former ally of former President Viktor Yanukovych, who fled Russia after the Maidan uprising. He was a lawmaker and has promoted views that closely align Russian narratives on Ukraine. Russia has dismissed the accusations by the UK as disinformation. Meanwhile, despite Russia's concerns, the US has shipped $200 million security support package for Ukraine. Here's a report. Britain's announcement accusing the Kremlin of seeking to install a pro-Russian leader in Ukraine came from the British Foreign Ministry on Saturday, saying Russian intelligence officers have been in contact with a number of former Ukrainian politicians as part of plans for an invasion. The Foreign Ministry declined to provide evidence to back its accusations, which come at a time of high tensions between Russia and the West over Russia's amassing of troops near its border with Ukraine. Moscow has insisted it has no plans to invade. The British ministry says it has information the Russian government was considering former Ukrainian lawmaker Yevgen Murayev as a potential candidate to head a pro-Russian leadership. The British Deputy Prime Minister Dominic Raab says Russia will face severe economic sanctions if it goes on to install the puppet regime. Yevgen Murayev himself has mockingly denied claims by the British government that he could be installed as leader of the puppet government. He said the claims made him doubt the quality of British intelligence work. Earlier on Sunday, he'd posted on Facebook a picture of himself, photoshopped to look like the fictional British secret agent James Bond. Amidst the air of uncertainty, U.S. President Joe Biden met with his national security team on Saturday at the Camp David presidential retreat to discuss continued Russian aggressive actions towards Ukraine. The White House says the president was briefed on the current state of Russian military operations on Ukraine's borders and discussed both sides' ongoing efforts to de-escalate the situation with diplomacy and a range of deterrence measures being coordinated closely with allies and partners, including ongoing deliveries of security assistance to Ukraine. The first shipment of the US $200 million security support package arrived in Kiev on Saturday. The delivery followed Secretary of State Antony Blinken's visit to the Ukrainian capital. Mr. Blinken met with Russian counterpart Sergei Lavrov in Geneva for talks on Friday, and both played down any prospect of quickly resolving their differences over Ukraine. In a related development, Germany's Navy Chief, Vice Admiral Achim Schonbach, stepped down on Saturday after drawing criticism for saying Russian President Vladimir Putin deserved respect and that Kiev would never win back annexed Crimea from Moscow. Schonbach made the remark to a think tank discussion in India on Friday and video published on social media. Schonbach said President Putin seeks to be treated as an equal by the West. Giving someone respect is low cost, even no cost. It's easy to give him the respect he really demands and probably also deserves, calling Russia an old and important country. In the meantime, residents in Ukraine's second biggest city, Kharkiv, say they hope for the best but will prepare for the worst as tensions between the country and Russia grows. Pro-Russian rebel spokesman Eduard Basurin said on Friday, Ukraine gets ready to unleash active combat in the east of the country and is amassing weaponry and ammunition near the front line. Russia, on the other hand, has started relocating Sukhoi Su-35 fighter jets to Belarus for drills. The Defense Ministry says 2 S-400 battalions, which typically include 8 anti-aircraft missile systems, each have started moving to Belarus from Russia's far east by train. Joining me now is London-based author, lawyer, publisher and commentator on world affairs. He's an alumni of the U.S. Department's International Exchange Program and has been a panelist in several high-level discussions. Mr. Dele Ogun is in London. Thank you for joining me on the program today.
Pleasure to be here.
Let's begin with your thoughts on the possibility of a Russian invasion into Ukraine. You think this is what President Vladimir Putin wants?
I don't think it's what he wants in the sense that he's on an adventure of his own. I think it's what he has to make NATO aware of, that there's a real possibility that he will invade if NATO was to continue to poke Russia in the eye effectively. One needs to understand that NATO is a military grouping, and their Article 5 principle means that if you attack one of them, you attack all of them. So if we put ourselves in the same position as Russia, stroke Mr. Putin, would you attack before Ukraine becomes a member of NATO, or would you attack after? Clearly, the answer is you would attack before. So it's a deterrent. It's designed to tell NATO, back off. You're getting too close for our comfort. And I think the Russians and Putin are well within their rights in that respect.
Russia does not want does not want Ukraine joining NATO. You talk about why. And then Russia also wants NATO to abandon military exercises and to stop selling weapons to Eastern Europe because they see this as a direct threat to its security. Do you think these concerns are genuine?
Absolutely. I think you can understand it best if you think back to the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962, when the roles were reversed, when it was Russia that was looking to position missiles in Cuba. Every state looks for security, and the closer your enemy base is, the less secure clearly that you are. And if Khrushchev had got away with his agenda of positioning missiles in Cuba right on the footsteps or the doorsteps of America, then clearly America's security will have been compromised. The roles are now reversed, and Ukraine is to Russia what Cuba was to America. And so one can, when you view it in that context, one can readily understand Russia's attitude and position is telling them back off. You're getting too close. If you look at the recent recruitment to membership of NATO, you can see that NATO has been pushing further east. The most recent additions, North Macedonia, that's 2020. Prior to that was Montenegro, 2017. Croatia was 2009. Albania also was 2009. If you then go back to the genesis of NATO, it was in the aftermath of the Second World War. The whole object of it was this. The British and the French had to give up quite a lot in order to persuade America to come into that war on the side of the Allied powers. The price for that intervention, remember, was the dismantling of their colonial empires. They did not want to have to pay the price again. So how best to secure America's future support in any wars? The solution was simply to establish NATO. And so they've got Americans in permanent alliance as far as Western Europe is concerned. That's all well and good. But what NATO has been doing, it always happens when you think you have the security and the comfort of numbers over your opponent. As more and more members have been joining NATO, NATO has been pushing its agenda closer and closer to the borders of Russia. Putin is not Gorbachev. Putin is making it clear that that's a red line. If you cross that, there will be consequences. So I think that's the context in which to understand what's going on.
So you're saying that the reason Russia is amassing troops at the border with Ukraine and the reason we have this war rhetoric going on, this propaganda, not a rhetoric now, but a propaganda of war, is because Russia feels, NATO is exceeding boundaries and going beyond its mandate.
Yes, NATO is going beyond what's needed for NATO's security. If you look at the position of America, for example, it is surrounded by the oceans. There's no immediate threat on its borders. If you look at, take for example, Britain, it has always had the comfort of the security of the waters around it. Russia does not have those kind of natural boundaries to secure, to enhance its security. So it relies on buffer states surrounding it. They don't have to be part of what was the Soviet Union. That's history now. They don't have to be part of a greater Russian empire, but it cannot afford those territories in a position like Belarus and Ukraine to now become members of the NATO club, military club, because that means that it's almost as if you've got America on your doorsteps. And so you can understand the Russian position fairly well.
Still ahead, My conversation with Dele Ogun continues. Plus, gunfire heard in Burkina Faso's capital. Is there another coup in West Africa? Stay with us. President Joe Biden said on Wednesday that he believes very strongly Russia is planning to invade Ukraine, and that the U.S. would react at the slightest sign of invasion by Russia. Do you think that at this time the U.S. is a strong ally of Ukraine? I mean, Secretary of State Antony Blinken was there during the week to reinforce the relations between the two countries, but we have seen America before promise, to provide support. An example is with the red line that former President Barack Obama spoke about with Iran, and Iran did cross the red line and nothing happened. You think the U.S. is a formidable ally for Ukraine at this time?
Biden's is not really in a position to threaten Russia. He's still recovering from the embarrassment of the US withdrawal from Afghanistan, and he can hardly afford to take on Russia so casually over the membership of Ukraine. And it is a reflection of how far back we've gotten since. Whoever would have thought that one might miss the politics of Donald Trump. If Trump had been in power, we would not have this standoff. Biden simply took us back to the petty politics or that prevailed before Trump came in. Trump, you may not have liked him in many respects, but he certainly didn't have this gung-ho, aggressive approach to foreign affairs. Biden, as I said, they're still smarting over the embarrassment of American withdrawal from Afghanistan. They can't afford another conflagration now, and certainly not with an entity in Russia's position and under the leadership of somebody like Putin, who does not take nonsense like Gorbachev did.
Well, you talk about former U.S. President Donald Trump not taking a gung-ho approach, but we did see, that dynamic between the U.S. and China, which escalated the U.S. and North Korea, beg your pardon, that's a great example. The U.S. and North Korea, which had people around the globe asking, whether, what this was going to amount to until both of them had that meeting eventually. So the German Navy chief, K. Achim Schonbach, who's resigned, says that Russia's president wants respect and that President Putin needs to be treated as an equal by the West. I know that Russia has been considered the bad boy of Europe, but do you think that President Putin really needs respect? I would think that he wants power more than respect.
I think, are they not the same things? I mean, politics and international relations is very much about power relationships, and power brings respect. Russia under Gorbachev was weak. It was exposed. It was vulnerable. And that's what led to the dismantling of the USSR. Putin has brought back respect for Russia because he has made Russia significantly more focused and therefore powerful. And so I think it's in these affairs, you've got to, however strong you are as a military alliance, if you go looking for trouble, I think we have to ask ourselves, what's NATO looking for in Ukraine? Where it's clear what Russia's looking for, which is security. It cannot afford Ukraine to become a member of that military alliance. What is the need for NATO to expand that far, right onto the borders of Russia? There are times when it becomes clear that who is looking for trouble, and you must. It boils down to respecting the potential of your opponent. Their values may be different, their way of life may be different, but if you go looking for trouble, you might well get it. As I said, the likelihood is that this is much more of a deterrent, Syria, thick red line that Putin is drawing. But if he's pushed far enough, of course he will. He would not hesitate to take Ukraine down before Ukraine becomes a member of NATO, because it's easier to do before than afterwards.
So in the end, we're just listening to propaganda on both sides. Propaganda on the side of, well, NATO and its allies who believe that Russia wants to invade Ukraine. And then there's also propaganda by Russia saying it has no plans to invade Ukraine, but then it's calling NATO out on its excesses. In the end, as you pointed out earlier, this is a similar case that happened with the US and Russia. Sorry, with the US and Cuba. So what happens now? How do we douse this tension?
Well, I guess everybody will be looking for a face-saving formula, because I don't seriously think that they're going to go to war over Ukraine. I don't think the NATO's strategic interest in Ukraine is great enough. They would like to get away with it if they could bring Ukraine into NATO membership. I simply don't see that happening. So with all the saber rattling on both sides, they've got to find a formula to ease back, and Russia will need and is insistent upon security guarantees as far as NATO's conduct and relationship with those border countries are concerned. You know, when you look at it in terms of the balance of interests, my own view is that Russia's interest in security is far greater than any interest that NATO can put forward as far as its relationship with Ukraine is concerned.
Mr. Dele Ogun, it's been a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you for joining me on Diplomatic Channel.
Thank you. Thank you.
Welcome back. Details are still emerging, but here's what we know. There was gunfire heard in Burkina Faso's capital, Ouagadougou, over the weekend near a military airbase. The government says there's been no coup, neither has President Roch Kabore been detained, but it seems there was a mutiny.
The gunfire was heard at several military camps where mutinying soldiers called for more support from the government in their fight against Al-Qaeda and Islamic State militants. The disaffected soldiers also wanted top generals to be replaced, better care for injured troops, and more support for the families of soldiers killed in battle. The arrest comes a little over a week after 12 people, including a senior army officer, were arrested on suspicion of planning to destabilize Burkina Faso's institutions. It also comes a day after police used tear gas to disperse banned rallies, arresting dozens. Heavy arms of fire were heard in Sango camp, which houses the army's general staff and a prison whose inmates, including soldiers, involved in a failed 2015 coup attempt. The gunshots were heard as early as 5 a.m. in the morning. One reporter on ground said he saw soldiers firing into the air in the camp. A witness also reported gunfire at military camp in Kaya, around 100 kilometers north of Ouagadougou. The government later confirmed the gunfire but denied the army had seized power. Speaking on the national television, Defense Minister General Barthélemy Simpore denied rumors that the president, Roch Kabore, had been detained, adding that the motive behind the gunfire was still unclear. In the meantime, hundreds of people gathered on the place, the La Nation, at the center of the city to show their support for the military. Police later dispersed a crowd of around 300 people who had been shouting that President Kabore leaves power. It was later discovered the headquarters of President Kabore's political party was burnt and looted by protesters. The location of President Kabore is currently unclear. The former banker and prime minister became president after winning elections in 2015. The polls were the first since long-serving leader Blaise Compaoré went into exile a year earlier following a popular uprising against his rule.
That's the program this week. You can send your questions and comments to @Amarachi_Ubani on Twitter and @Amarachi_Ubani on Instagram. Thanks again for watching. I'll see you next time.